The crystal wine glass shattered in my grip, sending shards and red wine cascading across the pristine white tablecloth. The dining room fell silent, but my mother-in-law's words still rang in my ears. What's the point of having such a big house if there aren't any children to fill it? I'm Solstice, and after 7 years of marriage to my wonderful husband Emiliano, I'd learned to steel myself against Lorelei's constant jabs about my childlessness. But tonight was different. Maybe it was the way she'd said it, with that saccharine smile while passing the salt, or maybe I'd simply reached my breaking point. Mother, that's enough, Emiliano said, his hand finding mine under the table. We've discussed this. Lorelei dabbed her lips with her napkin, the perfect picture of innocence. I'm simply making conversation, darling. After all, I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see some grandchildren before I die. I think we're done here, I said, pushing back from the table. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled as I tried to clean up the spilled wine. Oh, sit down, Solstice, Lorelei waved dismissively. The housekeeper can handle that. Though I suppose you wouldn't know much about cleaning up after children, would you? Lorelei. Emiliano's voice cracked like a whip. I stood up straight, wine seeping into my cream-colored blouse. You know what? You're right. I don't know anything about cleaning up after children. Just like you don't know anything about what we've been through, the fertility treatments, the disappointments, because you've never once asked. You've been too busy judging. I only want what's best for this family, Lorelei said, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her pearls. The Matthews name. The Matthews name? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that all you care about? Your precious legacy? Solstice, honey. Emiliano started, but I was already moving toward the door. No, let her go, Lorelei said. She's always been dramatic. This is exactly why I worry about grandchildren. Can you imagine someone so emotionally unstable raising a child? I stopped at the doorway, turned around, and met her eyes. You know what the difference is between us, Lorelei? I may not have children, but at least I'm not toxic to the ones I love. The drive home was silent. Emiliano kept glancing at me, but I stared straight ahead, watching raindrops race down the windshield. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he killed the engine, but neither of us moved. I'm sorry, he said finally. She was out of line. She's always out of line. I turned to face him. How much longer are we going to do this, Em? These monthly dinners, the constant criticism, the way she's my mother, Saul, and I'm your wife. The words hung between us like smoke. When does it end? When does she stop punishing me for something I can't control? Emiliano reached for my hand. We could skip next month's dinner, take some time. That's not the point. I pulled away, unbuckling my seatbelt. The point is that your mother has made me feel like a failure for 7 years, and you've let her. That's not fair, he protested, following me to the front door. I defend you. You defend me after the fact. You let her take her shots, then you clean up the mess. I fumbled with my keys, hands still shaking. I need more than that, Em. I need you to stop it before it starts. Inside, I headed straight for our bedroom, peeling off my wine-stained blouse. Emiliano lingered in the doorway, his face etched with concern. What do you want me to do? He asked softly. I sat on the edge of our bed, suddenly exhausted. I want to take a break from your mother. Not forever, just I need space. Time to figure out who I am without her voice in my head telling me I'm not enough. Saul, I'm not asking for permission, Em. I'm telling you what I need. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. Okay, whatever you need. We'll figure it out together. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his. I love you, I whispered, but I can't keep letting her break me. I know, he said, and I could hear the pain in his voice. I know. Later that night, as Emiliano slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying Lorelei's words. 7 years of subtle digs and outright insults, of sympathetic looks and backhanded comments. 7 years of trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, only to be found wanting. Something had to change. And if Lorelei wouldn't change, then I would. 3 months after the wine incident, I found myself standing in front of a room full of young women at the local community center, my heart racing but my voice steady. Architecture isn't just about designing buildings, I said, gesturing to the blueprints displayed behind me. It's about creating spaces where people can thrive. My friend Valerie had convinced me to give this talk as part of her women's mentorship program. Initially, I'd resisted, but now, looking at these eager faces, something clicked into place. A young woman in the back raised her hand. How did you deal with being one of the few women in your field? By refusing to apologize for taking up space, I answered, thinking of Lorelei, and by finding mentors who believed in me. After the presentation, while packing up my materials, a woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 28, with determined eyes and a portfolio clutched to her chest. I'm Remington, she said. Your talk really resonated with me. I'm trying to break into architectural design, but it feels impossible without connections. I smiled, remembering my own struggles. Nothing's impossible. Show me what you've got. She spread her sketches across the table, and I was immediately impressed by her innovative designs. We spent the next hour discussing her work, and I found myself energized by her passion. Listen, I said, scribbling my email on a sticky note. I'm looking for an intern at my firm. If you're interested, are you serious? Her eyes lit up. I would love that. That evening, I met Valerie for drinks, still buzzing from the day's events. Look at you, she said, sliding into the booth. I haven't seen you this animated in months. It felt good, I admitted, stirring my martini. Really good, like I was finally doing something meaningful, as opposed to trying to please your monster-in-law. I laughed. I haven't seen Lorelei since that night. Emiliano goes to dinner alone now. And how's that working out? Better than I expected. He was resistant at first, but I shrugged. It's given me space to focus on myself. About time, Valerie said, raising her glass, to taking up space. The next few weeks flew by. Remington proved to be an exceptional intern, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. I found myself looking forward to our mentoring sessions, sharing not just architectural knowledge, but life lessons as well. One afternoon, while reviewing a project, she asked, "How do you balance work and family?" I don't have children, I said, the words coming easier than they used to. But I've learned that family comes in many forms. Like this? She gestured between us with a smile. Exactly like this. That evening, I walked into my home office to find Emiliano waiting for me. You seem different lately, he said, perching on my desk. Happier. I am. I showed him Remington's latest designs. Look at what my intern's working on. She's brilliant. You're good with her, he observed. Teaching, mentoring, it suits you. It's funny, I said, sitting beside him. All those years of your mother making me feel less than for not having children, and here I am, making a difference in young women's lives anyway. He wrapped an arm around me. I'm sorry I didn't stand up to her sooner. I'm not, I surprised myself by saying. If you had, I might never have found this path. The phone rang, interrupting our moment. Emiliano answered, his expression darkening as he listened. It's Mother, he said after hanging up. There's trouble at the company. She's asking for your help. I laughed incredulously. My help? The emotionally unstable one? Saul, no, I want to hear this. What could the great Lorelei possibly need from me? There are rumors, he said carefully, about financial misconduct. The board is involved. She needs someone with your analytical skills to review the records. I sat back, processing this. And she sent you to ask? Actually, he looked uncomfortable. She wanted to ask you herself. She's downstairs. My first instinct was to refuse, to let her stew in whatever mess she'd created. But then I thought of Remington, of all the young women at the community center, of the power of taking the higher road. Tell her to come up, I said finally. Emiliano kissed my forehead. You're a better person than both of us deserve. As his footsteps retreated down the stairs, I straightened my desk, squared my shoulders, and prepared to face the woman who'd spent years trying to diminish me. This time, though, I wasn't the one who needed help. This time, I was the one with the power to say no. Lorelei looked smaller somehow, standing in my office doorway. Her usual perfect posture was slightly slumped, and her designer outfit seemed to hang on her frame. Solstice, she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. Thank you for seeing me. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Would you like some tea? No, She sat down, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. I need your help. So, I've heard. I kept my voice neutral. Tell me what's happening. There are accusations, she began, then stopped, looking at Emiliano. Perhaps we should discuss this privately? He started to leave, but I caught his hand. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of your son. She pressed her lips together, then nodded. Very well. The board, particularly Terrence Santiago, is claiming there are irregularities in our financial records. They're threatening an audit, possibly even criminal charges. And are there irregularities? Of course not. Some of her old fire returned. I've run that company impeccably for 30 years. But Terrence, he's manipulating things, turning the board against me. I opened my laptop. Show me. For the next hour, Lorelei walked me through the company's financial records. Despite our history, I had to admit she was thorough, but something wasn't adding up. These transactions, I pointed to the screen, they're legitimate but structured oddly, almost like someone wanted them to look suspicious. Exactly. Lorelei leaned forward, but I can't prove it. Terrence has been whispering to the board for months, positioning himself as the solution to a problem he created. A hostile takeover, Emiliano muttered. I need someone with fresh eyes, Lorelei said. Someone who can see patterns I might have missed. Someone, she swallowed hard, someone smarter than me. The admission clearly cost her, and part of me savored it. But before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Remington. Emergency at the community center. Need your advice. I have another commitment, I said, standing. I'll need time to review everything properly. But Lorelei started to protest. You've had 30 years to run this company. Give me at least a few days to understand what's happening. At the community center, I found Remington pacing outside. Her usual confidence was shaken. What's wrong? I asked. The grant proposal for the youth architecture program, she said. I just found out there's another organization competing for the funding. They have more experience, better connections. I smiled, remembering Lorelei's words about connections. Then we'll have to be smarter than them. Show me what you've got. We spent the next 2 hours refining her proposal, strengthening her arguments. Watching her confidence return, I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction. You know what the best part of mentoring is? I told her, watching someone realize their own power. Back home that evening, I was reviewing Lorelei's files when I overheard voices from downstairs. She's enjoying this, Lorelei was saying, making me wait, making me dependent on her help. Mother, Emiliano's voice was tired. She's doing you a favor. A favor. This is her revenge, pure and simple. First, she refuses to give you children, and now she's holding my company hostage. I stepped into the doorway. Is that really what you think? They both turned, startled. Lorelei at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Solstice, No, please, I interrupted. Continue explaining how I'm deliberately childless just to spite you. Or better yet, tell me more about how I'm holding your company hostage by spending my evening trying to save it. I didn't mean, yes, you did. I walked down the stairs, laptop in hand. You know what's fascinating, Lorelei? I've spent hours looking at your company's records. You're brilliant at what you do, but you're so convinced of your own superiority that you can't see when someone's manipulating you. I opened the laptop, showing them what I'd found. These transactions, they're being restructured through shell companies. Someone with inside access is making legitimate deals look suspicious, and while you're busy blaming me for your problems, they're systematically destroying everything you've built. Lorelei's face paled. How did you? Because I stopped trying to prove myself to you and started proving myself to me. I closed the laptop. Now, would you like my help, or would you prefer to continue questioning my life choices? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Lorelei spoke, her voice small. I need your help. Then let's start again, I said. And this time, remember that I'm not your enemy. Whoever's trying to take your company, that's your enemy, and they're counting on you being too proud to accept help from the daughter-in-law you've always underestimated. The next morning, I arrived at the Matthews Company headquarters, armed with my laptop and a determination I usually reserved for difficult clients. Emiliano had insisted on coming with me, though I suspected it was more to keep peace than to help. Ms. Santiago is waiting in the conference room, the receptionist said, her eyes darting nervously between us. Ms. Santiago? I turned to Emiliano. Terrence's wife? Sister, he corrected. Diana, she's the company's legal counsel. The conference room was all glass and steel, with views of the city skyline. Diana Santiago sat at the head of the table, every bit as polished as Lorelei, but with a predatory edge. Mrs. Matthews, she smiled, not warmly. I wasn't aware you were involving family in this matter. Solstice is a forensic architect, Lorelei said, entering behind us. She specializes in analyzing structural and financial patterns. I hid my surprise at her defense of me. Shall we begin? For the next hour, I presented my findings, watching Diana's face carefully. Her expression remained neutral, but her fingers tapped an increasingly agitated rhythm on the table. These accusations against my brother are serious, she said finally. They're not accusations, I corrected. They're patterns. Would you like to explain why your brother's signature appears on documents redirecting company funds through 3 separate shell corporations? I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable. My phone buzzed. A text from Remington. One presentation. They loved it. Drinks to celebrate. I smiled briefly before returning to the matter at hand. The board meeting is tomorrow. You have until then to get ahead of this. Is that a threat? Diana stood. No, it's a courtesy, because the next people to see these documents will be the SEC. After Diana stormed out, Lorelei turned to me. You didn't tell me you had proof of Terrence's involvement. I didn't until last night. Your company's cybersecurity needs work. Sol, Emiliana warned. It's fine, Lorelei said. She's right. She paused, straightening her jacket. Thank you, Solstice. I know you didn't have to help. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Valerie. Emergency at the center. That grant money, there's a problem. I have to go, I said, gathering my things. The board meets at 10 tomorrow. Be ready. At the community center, I found Valerie and Remington looking devastated. They're trying to pull the funding, Remington explained. Someone filed a complaint about our program, saying we lack the necessary experience. Let me guess, I said, a suspicion forming. Was it the Santiago Foundation? Their surprised looks confirmed it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Emiliano. Remember how I said Terrence's reach seemed too wide? Check if his foundation has any connection to the community center's board. That evening, I spread everything out on our dining room table: company documents, grant proposals, board member lists. Emiliano brought me coffee and watched me work. You know, he said, Mother always said you were too focused on your career. But watching you these past few days, this is who you are, isn't it? Someone who fights for what matters. I learned from the best. I smiled wryly. Your mother taught me exactly how not to treat people. The doorbell rang. Lorelei stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I found something, she said, holding out a USB drive. After what you said about cybersecurity, I had IT do a deep dive. Terrence hasn't just been manipulating company records, he's been systematically undermining everything connected to our family. Including the community center's grant? I asked. She blinked. How did you? Because he's not just trying to take your company, he's trying to destroy your legacy, and he's using everything and everyone connected to you to do it. But why? Because 30 years ago, Emiliano said quietly, you chose to run the company instead of letting his father take control. Lorelei sank into a chair. Thomas Santiago, Terrence's father, was my husband's best friend. He expected to take over when... She trailed off. When your husband died, I finished, and now his son is finishing what his father couldn't. I never thought, Lorelei's voice cracked. I've spent so much time worried about the family legacy, about having grandchildren to carry on the name, that I didn't see someone was already destroying everything we built. I looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at this woman who had caused me so much pain, now facing the destruction of her life's work. Well, I said, picking up the USB drive, it's a good thing you have family to help you fight back. The look she gave me was worth every criticism she'd ever leveled my way. Because finally, she saw me, not as the daughter-in-law who couldn't give her grandchildren, but as the woman who could help save everything she held dear. The boardroom was packed the next morning. I sat between Emiliano and Lorelei, watching Terrence Santiago work the room like a politician at a fundraiser. His confidence made my blood boil. Before we begin, Terrence announced, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Why is Mrs. Matthews' daughter-in-law present at this meeting? Because I invited her. Lorelei stood, her voice steady, and because she's about to show you exactly why. I connected my laptop to the projector, pulling up the first set of documents. Over the past 6 months, someone has been systematically manipulating this company's financial records. Yes, Terrence interrupted. That's why we're here. The irregularities in Lorelei's. Let me finish, I said, clicking to the next slide. These transactions were deliberately restructured to appear suspicious, but the real fraud isn't in the transactions themselves, it's in who was accessing them. The room grew quiet as I displayed the access logs, timestamps, and IP addresses. Mr. Santiago, I turned to face him. Would you like to explain why you were accessing these files at 3 a.m. from your home computer? His smile faltered slightly. I was doing my due diligence. By creating shell companies? I clicked again, showing the incorporation documents. Or by using those companies to funnel money away from the community programs this company supports. Diana Santiago stood up. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. Actually, Lorelei interjected, we have every proof, including your brother's attempts to sabotage the community center's grant programs through your family foundation. The board members began murmuring among themselves. I could see the moment Terrence realized he was losing control. This is a witch hunt, he declared. You're trying to distract from your own mismanagement. No, a quiet voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Remington standing there, holding a thick folder. They're exposing yours. Who is this? Terrence demanded. This is Remington, I said, the program director whose grant you tried to kill. Would you like to explain to the board why you've been targeting community programs that help young women enter male-dominated fields? I don't have to explain anything to. Actually, one of the board members spoke up. You do, because if these allegations are true, you've violated at least 6 different corporate governance policies. The next hour was a blur of accusations, denials, and finally, confessions. When Terrence realized the evidence against him was overwhelming, he tried to blame Diana. She, in turn, produced emails proving he'd orchestrated everything. By the time security escorted them out, Lorelei looked both exhausted and triumphant. I never thought he hated me that much, she said quietly as the board members filed out. All these years, carrying his father's grudge. Sometimes the people closest to us can be our biggest blind spots, I replied, thinking of our own relationship. Later that afternoon, I met Remington at the community center. The grant money had been restored, with additional funding as a goodwill gesture from the board. You were amazing, she said, hugging me. The way you handled everything, I want to be like you when I grow up. I laughed. You're already amazing. You just needed someone to remind you. Like you needed someone to remind you? She raised an eyebrow. Your mother-in-law isn't the only one who's been watching and learning these past few weeks. Before I could respond, Lorelei appeared in the doorway. She looked uncertain, a expression I'd never seen on her face before. May I come in? She asked. Remington squeezed my hand and slipped out, leaving us alone. I've been watching you, Lorelei said, walking around the room, examining the students' architectural models. The way you mentor these young women, the way you fought for what's right. I was wrong about you, Solstice. Which part? I couldn't help asking. The part where I'm emotionally unstable, or the part where I'm not enough for your son? She flinched. All of it. I was so focused on what I thought family should look like that I couldn't see the family you were actually building. These young women, they look at you the way I always hoped my grandchildren would look at me. They're not replacements for children, I said firmly. They're their own people with their own dreams. I just help them achieve them. I know, she nodded. That's what makes you special. You don't need someone to carry on your legacy because you're building it every day with every life you touch. She paused, including mine. I stood there, processing her words, feeling the weight of years of judgment finally beginning to lift. Would you like to stay? I offered. The students are presenting their final projects today. She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. I'd like that very much. A week after Terrence's downfall, I was back at the company offices, helping Lorelei sort through years of documentation. What started as a simple cleanup had turned into an archaeological dig through decades of family history. Look at this, Lorelei said, holding up a yellowed photograph. Your father-in-law and Thomas Santiago, the day they started the company. I took the photo, studying the two young men's smiling faces. They looked happy. They were. Lorelei's voice softened, until money and power got in the way. The door opened and Diana Santiago walked in, escorted by security. She looked different, defeated, but somehow dangerous. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal items, the guard said. Lorelei stood. I'll supervise. Actually, Diana said, I'd like to speak with Solstice, alone. I nodded to Lorelei, who hesitated before leaving. Diana waited until the door closed. You think you've won, she said, opening her desk drawer. You think you've figured everything out. Haven't I? She pulled out a manila envelope. Did you ever wonder why Lorelei was so obsessed with grandchildren? Why she tormented you about it for years? Because she's traditional, obsessed with legacy. Because she's guilty. Diana tossed the envelope onto the desk. Open it. Inside were medical records from 30 years ago. As I read, my hands began to shake. That's impossible, I whispered. Is it? Your husband's inability to have children? Did you never wonder why? I stared at the documents. They showed that Emiliano had been exposed to harmful chemicals as a child, chemicals from one of the company's early construction projects, a project that Lorelei had approved despite safety concerns. She knew, Diana said softly. She knew her decisions made her own son infertile, and instead of facing that guilt, she spent years blaming you. Why are you showing me this? Because revenge isn't always about winning. She gathered her belongings. Sometimes it's about making sure everyone loses. I sat there long after Diana left, the documents burning a hole in my conscience. When Lorelei returned, she took one look at my face and knew. What did she show you? I held up the medical records. Were you ever going to tell us? The color drained from her face. Solstice. 7 years, my voice cracked. 7 years of making me feel worthless when you knew. You knew it wasn't my fault. I couldn't face it, she whispered. The guilt. I threw myself into the company, tried to make it successful enough to justify what happened, and then when Emiliano married you and you couldn't have children, you made me your scapegoat. I'm sorry, she said, reaching for me. I stepped back. Does Emiliano know? No. She sank into a chair. I couldn't bear to tell him. How do you tell your son that your ambition destroyed his chance at fatherhood? The irony was almost too much. So, instead, you destroyed his wife's self-worth? Before she could respond, my phone rang. It was Remington. Can you come to the center? She asked. One of the students is having a crisis about her project, and she's asking for you. I looked at Lorelei, at the pain and guilt etched on her face, and made a decision. I'll be right there, I said into the phone. Then to Lorelei, this isn't over, but right now, someone needs me, someone I can actually help. At the center, I found Maria, one of our youngest students, in tears over her design. It's not perfect, she sobbed. Nothing I do is ever perfect. I sat beside her. Perfect is overrated. Perfect means you've stopped growing. But what if I fail? Then you'll learn from it. Trust me, I know something about failure and guilt and letting it define you. I picked up her pencil. But you know what's better? Learning to redefine yourself. We spent the next hour reworking her design. By the time she left, smiling, I'd made my decision. Emiliano was waiting when I got home. Mother called, he said. She was crying. What happened? I took his hand and led him to the couch. There's something you need to know, and after I tell you, we're going to decide together how to move forward. You're scaring me. I'm scared too, I admitted. But we've spent too many years letting fear and guilt control our lives. It's time for the truth. And as I began to tell him everything, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about finally breaking free from the pain they caused. Emiliano didn't speak for a long time after I showed him the medical records. He sat in our living room, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. All these years, he finally said, his voice hollow. All these years of watching you blame yourself, and she knew. No, he stood abruptly. We're going to see her, now. The drive to Lorelei's house was tense. When she opened the door and saw our faces, she stepped back like she'd been struck. Come in, she said quietly. How could you? Emiliano's voice shook. How could you let Solstice carry that burden alone? I was trying to protect you. By destroying her? He paced the elegant living room. By making her feel like less of a woman? I was wrong, Lorelei whispered. I know that now. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it, I said, pulling out my phone. But this isn't just about us anymore. I showed them the email I'd received that morning from the company's legal team. Diana had sent copies of the medical records to several board members before leaving. They're calling for a full investigation into past safety violations, I explained. This could destroy everything. Let it burn, Emiliano said bitterly. No. I stood up. We're not doing this. We're not letting one terrible decision destroy 3 decades of good work. Solstice, Lorelei started. I'm not finished. Yes, you made an unforgivable choice. Yes, you spent years punishing me for your guilt. But this company also funds programs that help hundreds of young women. I won't let them become collateral damage in our family drama. My phone buzzed. Remington again. The press is here at the center. They're asking about the company's connection to our program. It's starting, Lorelei said, sinking into a chair. No, I replied. It's ending, on our terms. I turned to them both. We're going to hold a press conference. We're going to tell the truth, all of it, and then we're going to announce a new initiative. What initiative? Emiliano asked. A foundation dedicated to workplace safety and supporting families affected by corporate negligence. I looked at Lorelei. Funded by your personal shares in the company. Everything I own? She whispered. Everything you built on that first mistake. It's time to make it right. An hour later, we stood before a crowd of reporters at the community center. Remington and her students lined the back wall, watching silently. 30 years ago, Lorelei began, her voice trembling, I made a decision that prioritized profit over people. That decision had consequences, personal and professional, that I've been running from ever since. She told them everything. The unsafe conditions, the cover-up, the years of displacement guilt. When she finished, I stepped forward. But this isn't just a story about past mistakes, I said. It's about how we choose to move forward. Today, we're announcing the creation of the Future Forward Foundation, dedicated to ensuring no other family faces what ours did. The questions came rapid fire. Mrs. Matthews, are you stepping down? Will there be legal repercussions? How much money is being committed? Everything, Lorelei said firmly. I'm committing everything I have to this foundation. She turned to me, with my daughter-in-law as its director. I hadn't expected that. Neither had Emiliano, judging by his sharp intake of breath. Why? I asked her quietly, away from the microphones. Because you're the only one who saw past revenge to something better. She smiled sadly. You're the leader I should have been. After the press conference, Remington approached with tears in her eyes. That was incredible, she said. The way you turned pain into purpose. This is going to help so many people. It will, I agreed, watching Lorelei speak with some of the students. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. Emiliano wrapped his arm around me. You amazed me today, both of you. We have a lot to work through, I reminded him. We do, but we'll do it together. He kissed my temple. And maybe we can look into adoption, if you want. Start our own kind of family. I already have a family, I said, watching Remington show Lorelei her latest designs. It just looks different than we expected. The reporters had mostly left when Lorelei approached us one last time. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said. No, I agreed, but you can earn our respect, starting now. She nodded, understanding the difference. As she walked away, Emiliano squeezed my hand. Ready to go home? He asked. I looked around at the center, at the students, at the future we were building from the ashes of the past. I am home, I said. And for the first time in years, I finally feel worthy of it. The autumn breeze carried the sound of laughter through the community center's open windows as I watched Lorelei critique student presentations. Her silver hair caught the sunlight as she leaned over a design table, pointing out details with the same precision she once used to find fault in me. The Foundation's first round of grants goes out tomorrow, Emiliano said, joining me at the window. 20 families affected by workplace accidents, all getting full support for medical care and education. I saw the list, I nodded. Did you notice the first name? Thomas Santiago's grandson. I thought that was fitting. The door opened and Remington burst in, waving a paper. We got it! The city approved our expansion plans. Show me, I said, clearing space on my desk. She spread out the blueprints, our vision for transforming the community center into a full-fledged technical institute for women. Look at these sight lines, Lorelei said, joining us. The natural light will be perfect for the design studios. That was Solstice's idea. Remington beamed. She insisted on making sure every workspace felt inspiring. My phone buzzed, a text from Deanna. You were right, about everything. Thank you for showing me a better way forward. Speaking of moving forward, Emiliano said, pulling out an envelope. These came this morning, our approval papers from the adoption agency. My hands trembled as I opened them. We're officially approved as foster parents and potential adoptive parents, he smiled. Though something tells me our definition of family will keep expanding whether we plan it or not. As if on cue, Maria, our youngest student, poked her head in. Ms. Solstice, can you help me with something? Of course, I turned to the others. Excuse me. Go, Lorelei said softly. This is what you were meant to do. I found Maria in the workshop, struggling with a complex model structure. I can't get it right, she sighed. Let me tell you a story, I said, sitting beside her, about a woman who spent years thinking she wasn't enough, until she realized that enough wasn't about meeting someone else's expectations. As we worked on her model, I could hear Lorelei in the next room, announcing the Foundation's new scholarship program to a group of students. Her voice carried the same authority it always had, but now it lifted people up instead of tearing them down. Solstice? Maria asked, putting down her tools. Are you happy, even without having your own kids? I looked around at the center, at Remington mentoring younger students, at Emiliano reviewing adoption papers, at Lorelei finally using her power to heal rather than hurt. I am happy, I said, because I learned that family isn't about who you're born to or what you can give them. It's about who you choose to love and how you choose to show it. The end-of-day bell rang, and students began gathering their things. Lorelei approached as Maria packed up. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said about turning pain into purpose. And I'd like to start a support group for parents who've had to face hard truths about how their choices affected their children. If you think that would be appropriate. I studied her face, the new humility there, the genuine desire to help. I think that would be perfect. Emiliano appeared with our coats. Ready for dinner? Valerie's waiting at the restaurant to celebrate the adoption approval. Just a minute, I said, walking to the window. The setting sun painted the city in shades of gold, and below, I could see our students heading home, carrying their dreams and portfolios and blueprints. You know, Lorelei said, joining me, I spent so many years focused on what our family should look like that I missed what it could be. Thank you for showing me a different way. Thank you for being willing to learn, I replied. The Foundation Board meeting is tomorrow, she continued. They want to discuss expanding our programs nationwide. Good, I smiled, because I have some ideas about that. As we left the center, Emiliano took my hand. You've built something amazing here. We all did, I corrected him. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built on repaired cracks. Outside, Maria was waiting for her mother, showing off her finished model. Remington was explaining the scholarship program to a new student. Lorelei was already making notes about tomorrow's meeting. And me? I was exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by the family I chose, the purpose I found, and the strength I'd always had. Not everyone gets the family they thought they wanted. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to rewrite the rules, you get the family you were meant to have all along.